Hello, we welcome you to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. Once again with your hosts, myself, Bernhard Günther, and my wife, Laura Matsu. And the episode we dive into today is about the masculine wound and how to heal it. Very, very prevalent topic for these times we're in, because there is a crisis of healthy masculinity that has been really building up for, I would say, decades, even centuries, around distorted ideas around what it really means to be a man. There's also the idea of a pseudo or hypomasculinity that has become a knee-jerk reaction to feminism and the feminization of man and the distortion around what the mainstream calls, quote-unquote, toxic masculinity. It has also become common to label men, or men label themselves as beta males or alpha males. However, these stereotypes are also two sides of the same coin of unintegrated, wholesome masculinity. As a result, there's also a crisis of healthy relationships between men and women, and many men suffer from depression and loss of meaning and purpose in their lives despite any outer accomplishments. So for men, it is really about integrating their healthy masculinity, and it's about going beyond beta or alpha male labels, mindset or personality behaviors, right? It is not about behaving in a certain way or trying to force yourself to behave in a certain way. It's really an inner journey of integrating the feminine archetypes within the man. That's the key point. In other words, here's almost the irony. In order to become a truly embodied man with healthy masculine traits, he needs to integrate his inner feminine qualities. Toxic masculinity and the boy man who are kind of stuck in an adolescent level of consciousness, again, regardless of any material success like money and fame and all that, they're the result of not integrating these feminine archetypes within the man. So this deeper crisis in man and masculinity obviously also affects women. And I would say it's also important for women to understand what men are actually struggling with on a deeper level and mostly unconsciously. So all of this requires a psycho-spiritual approach, an understanding of the male psyche from a transpersonal psychological perspective. And again, a key point to understand is that a man's sense of value, worth, safety, joy, contentment, belongingness, creativity, purpose, and especially happiness actually derive from his inner feminine nature, and not just via external accomplishments, right? Which can also oftentimes be unconscious compensations for the lack of inner integration and wholeness. So in short, men have feminine qualities within themselves and women have masculine qualities within themselves, and both sexes need to bring them into balance. However, most of us, or most men and women, have either rejected or repressed the opposite within, or they unconsciously are taken over by it, while they project them on the opposite sex and what they actually need to integrate themselves. Now, as I just mentioned, men have various inner feminine parts, energies, and archetypes and figures within themselves need to integrate to become whole. And it's interesting to note that many ancient mythologies and classical literature have described this psychological inner process and the three levels of masculine consciousness in a man's inner and outer development, which we'll be talking about as well. So in this podcast, we will explore these different feminine elements within a man. In particular, the mother complex, which is not to be mistaken for his physical mother, and the anima, which Carl Jung related to the soul of a man. We will show how the lack of integrating these inner feminine figures show up in a man's life, why integrating them are essential for a man's happiness and relationship to the women in his life, be it his wife, partner, daughter, sister, or mother. We also talk about what a woman needs to be aware of and how she can support a man if she truly wants him to shine in his masculinity and receive from him what also supports her. And then we dive deep in the second hour for members, where we do an in-depth exploration of Parsifal's search of the Holy Grail from the 12th century King Arthur legends. The Grail myth speaks of masculine psychology, depicting 3 stages of psychological development for a man. These are archetypal stages of psychological inner development that every man, quote unquote, needs to go through. However, modern society, as we have lost our connection to these ancient myths, right? People take them way too literal oftentimes, and they miss the deeper message on and about internal transformation. If really understood from a deeper psycho-spiritual context and the metaphors, these myths provide guidance and give us actually profound insight into archetypal psycho-spiritual processes. So we really want to explore that. And really engaging into this inner alchemy is more important than ever for a man in the world that has become devoid of spirit and deeper meaning, right? Where superficial appearance, obsession, and identification with the physical body, or complete dissociation from it, and mindless consumption and materialism overshadow the deep loss of meaning and the higher purpose in a man's heart. And I want to emphasize this episode is also important for women, right? To learn more about male psychology and the secrets of the Grail myth, to learn more about the man in their lives, be it the father, brother, son, husband, or boyfriend. And before we really dive into and start, just a little shout out again for anyone who is not aware. The second hour of the podcast is available for members, and you can sign up to the membership at my website at veilofreality.com/membership. We have now over 145 episodes available for the second hour, which you can check out for just $11 a month. So go to my website, veilofreality.com, sign up there, and you have access to a lot of content similar to this one. All right, so let's dive into it. Let's start off with the quote, because I'm also referencing some works, specifically Robert Johnson from his book, Lying with the Heavenly Woman. All right. Do you mind reading this quote?
Yes. So Robert Johnson, really great writer, Jungian therapist. And he says in his book, Lying with the Heavenly Woman, quote, "Men in their arrogance generally think it is their strength, possessions, and dominations that bring them happiness, but it is not so. Happiness is feminine in a man, a feeling quality, and generally mysterious to him. Without good masculinity, a man is weak, ineffective, and useless, but it is femininity that inspires his strength, meaning, and value. The more a man is in harmony with his inner feminine nature, the easier it will be to be on good terms with the exterior woman in his life. Without being in touch with his inner feminine, a man is an impotent beam of light streaking his energy through the world, but without any creativity, substance, and essence."
Exactly. Beautifully phrased. And this ties into another concept, which I've mentioned in the introduction a little bit, the rise of hypermasculinity. There's almost a compensation of needing to become a manly man nowadays, maybe as a knee-jerk reaction, what we've seen from the left, the feminization of man, right? And everybody wants to be this alpha male, right?
Yeah.
But hypermasculinity is really a defense mechanism of an inner feminine wound, of not being in touch with this feminine richness of creativity, of inspiration within, right? And as a result, it creates a false self to appear more manly, more brute, right? More strong and all of that. But it's a coping mechanism that can or does create a false self that is often macho or covert or overt misogynistic. And we see this a lot in the so-called manosphere community, right? The red pill manosphere community and all that. And there are various symptoms of hypermasculinity. You know, one of them is definitely anger and the inability to self-regulate, really, or mistaken dissociation, lack of empathy, and emotional numbness for emotional control, right? Where people actually, or men are checked out of their emotions and then see this as a sign of strength. Workaholism is another one. There's the need to prove or show off one's masculinity, be it physically or via his accomplishments and possessions, the trophy wife, and so on. We will talk about this further on, how this also relates to the lack of integration of the inner feminine. Hypermasculinity relates to also being addicted to working out and extremely identified with the physical body, right? And almost basing his self-value on his six-pack. And there's also a big shadow in hypermasculinity regarding actually addiction to drugs, alcohol, even pornography, infidelity, and promiscuity, while at the same time being very openly judgmental and projecting, on other women harshly judging, for example, OnlyFans or other women in general for their quote-unquote body count. And people or men overcompensating with hypermasculinity also secretly or not so secretly suffer from depression as a result of the emotional suppression in order not to appear weak again, right? And it's ultimately a lack of integration of the inner feminine. So we actually see attempts of healing the masculine wound, but more in an unconscious, destructive way, I would say, to become more quote-unquote manly in the so-called red pill manosphere, as I just mentioned, or the polarity movement, which is based on very stereotypical gender roles. And it's most often based also on superficial personality and behavior performance and oversimplified male and female stereotypes, as I just said.
I think that's the main thing, is it's really working on a outer level, persona level, right? It says nothing about the inner life of the individual. I know that there's some polarity teachers who go into more psychospiritual dynamics, but for the most part, it's more working on a persona level and trying to just create the false self or their personality into like a more masculinized or feminized version of itself, essentially. And everything you said also, in a nutshell, is kind of like why Andrew Tate is so popular too.
I'm going to reference him a couple times
because it's like almost everything like reminds me of his own kind of social media persona.
And he's the embodiment of being taken over by the mother complex, which we'll talk about shortly as well.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons why we really have a crisis of healthy masculinity is also because our modern civilization lacks conscious initiation rituals or rite of passages that initiate a boy into manhood, right? We only have these pseudo-initiations, right, which I have gone through as well, like getting your driver license or legally being able to drink alcohol, parties, raves, drugs, or college frat boys, fraternities, gangs, military, or all kinds of humiliation rituals, which are not conscious rite of passages, but unconscious initiation rituals that really don't carry the boy through an inner psychospiritual process to truly become a man. Mm-hmm. It's only about outer performance.
Yeah.
And the problem is then, because our modern society has abandoned traditional rituals, right, which are supposed to help the individual to form their gender identities, so they lost a meaningful way, both men and women, to mature in their lives. Right? I think that's also with the whole gender ideology on pronouns is actually also a result of healthy initiation rituals and a deeper psychospiritual process for both girls and boys to be initiated into womanhood and manhood.
Yeah. And I mean, I see this actually. I know I have relatives who, you know, they were men and they weren't growing up. They weren't becoming mature, going out in the world. And what did their family do? They just threw them into the military,
exactly.
You know, forced them to go into the military thinking that would make them evolve. But actually, a lot of them just got traumatized with their experiences in the military, still end up with the same inner problems as before. But now they have this like hardened mask because of what they went through.
Yes, exactly. Now, the problem is, of course, as you just hinted at or showed, that without these rites of passages, from a male perspective, many men never experience a proper initiation into adulthood. Right? I can see myself in that as well. And oftentimes leads to a situation then where boy psychology dominates. And that's what we see in the world a lot. Boys in adult male bodies, again, irrespective of any outer accomplishments. Now, really important now when we talk about the integration of the inner archetypes, we need to also understand what kind of feminine elements we're talking about, or archetypes, and how to differentiate them, because that's a key aspect, is differentiation. To really understand yourself, know thyself, the deep, different parts of your psyche, and in this particular instance of the male psyche or the male psychology. Now, based especially also from a psychospiritual perspective, there are 6 basic relationships a man has to his own inner feminine world, right? And all 6 of these archetypes are useful to a man, and each of them has their own ability. The problem is if a man is, number one, not aware of them, contaminates them, meaning he muddles them and mistakes that one for the other, or projects them externally on the outside world, even institutions, governments, or other women,
I would say on a consensus level, meaning everyday, ordinary people are most likely suppressing and projecting this element.
Absolutely.
It's not conscious at all. I would say only a small percentage of the world, or men, I guess, in this case, are aware of these inner figures, a very small percentage.
Absolutely.
So most of these things that you're going to talk about show up via projection.
Exactly. So the main 6 feminine elements in a man are: number 1, the effect of his actually physical human mother; number 2, the mother complex, which is not to be mistaken for his physical mother; number 3, the anima; number 4, the mother archetype, which is really the feminine half of God, the divine mother, right? It's also symbolized in the Holy Grail, which we were talking about. Number 5, his wife or partner, his feminine female figures in his life. And number 6, Sophia, the goddess of wisdom. Out of all of these 6, we're going to focus in this podcast specifically on the mother complex and the anima, because this is a big topic, and also because the most important imminent feminine figures within a man to differentiate and integrate are the mother complex and the anima. So this is the most important work for anyone, any man. It is really the prerequisite for being grounded in healthy and creative masculinity, to walk and fulfill his higher purpose, and also to engage in healthy relationships with a woman, and to be an embodied role model for his children as well. So, as you just mentioned out, in most people, these inner feminine qualities, especially the anima and the mother complex, are unconscious and undifferentiated, right? And unintegrated, and projects them on other women, also institutions, governments, religions, material things, and even on his own children, to the detriment of himself or whoever are the targets of his positive and negative projections.
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about the mother complex. And so the mother complex is the most difficult encounter for any man, and nothing is as dangerous to a man as his unresolved mother complex. It's important to understand the mother complex, again, is not one's actual mother, even though the mother complex is influenced by the physical mother. So a complex is basically a constellation of feelings, of images constellated around the mother, essentially.
Correct.
So men may blame their mother for their mother complex because of how she influenced how it shows up in his life. But the real battle is always inwards. And the mother complex is basically his wish to regress into infancy again, to crawl into bed, to pull the covers over his head, to evade some responsibility that faces him. It can show up as discouragement or paralysis in life, or just being fed up with it all. This is a man's wish to fail. It's him being defeatist. It can show up as a fascination with death or accidents, or a demand to be taken care of. This is pure poison in a man's psychology. So the mother complex tends to show up by a man's tendency to give up or take refuge in the thousands of excuses of why he can't do something. So how it can show up, the mother complex, it can show up as a passive acceptance of authority in order to gain safety, or to just go along with what your parents or society told you would be good for you, just so you can have that safety. For example, a mother complex can show up in a man when he's pursuing a degree or career just because it offers a secure job and a paycheck, even though he doesn't like it. That's a sign that your mother complex is taking over. Another popular way that the mother complex shows up, which I think is super predominant in today's society, is just wanting to escape, smoke pot, play video games, or just watch porn and masturbate and engage in mindless consumption and entertainment. It can also show up in the need to experience close to death adrenaline rushes, like in extreme sports, like bungee jumping, skydiving. It can show up in the need to have expensive man toys, like sport, like expensive cars, or anything that can prove a man's masculinity to the outside world. Because only a man who is overtaken by this mother complex has a need to prove or show off his masculinity. So when the mother complex shows up in a man, he doesn't also have access to the healthy mother archetype, the divine mother, so the nurturing, loving aspect of the mother archetype. And this will show up as endlessly complaining about life or wallowing in negativity or being stuck in a victimhood state of consciousness where he just blames the outer world for the state of his life or whatever's going on with him. And, his will to fail will overcome the will to live. So the mother complex is kind of a slow suicide. And I will read a quote from Robert Johnson again, Lying with the Heavenly Woman, where he talks about all these different feminine archetypes within men. And he says, quote, "The bravado and bantam rooster behavior of any young male is a product of his fright at the impending dragon that faces him. If he thinks the battle is out there, he will make the most ridiculously blustering attempts at settling it out there. He has to have in here, within himself, basically, settled, before he can make the slightest progress out there. Most men saddle their psychological horses. They make a brave foray out there, fail because they did not have the dragon settled inside, and then have to face that awful moment inside when the balance scale of life or death flips back and forth. It is the mother complex that is a death-dealing element in life. This is the true dragon battle, and it is here on this level that any youth makes or breaks the first half of his life. He thinks he wins his maleness by great accomplishments out there, but the real dragon battle is a totally interior one. When that battle is won, he can accomplish out there and have something to show the world and prove his value. But no amount of out there accomplishment can settle the dragon battle, and there are still many men of all ages who have accomplished great things and amassed great fortunes, but who are still vulnerable to the inner dragon or mother complex. Far too many modern men make a hue and cry over maleness in outer form, while they are quietly losing their inner dragon battles by default. Tons of sporting equipment and fleets of fast cars are sold to bolster the male image, but these are a sad substitute for that wonderful, terrible moment when a young man slays his dragon and is free of his longing to return to the dependence of boyhood and to be taken care of by a mother. A young man's insistence on dangerous adventures is a thin disguise for his mother complex. To risk being killed on a motorcycle or to hang precariously on a cliff signals the intrusion of the mother complex masquerading as ultimate maleness. The conscious or unconscious wish to fail or to die is so strong in a man with a mother complex that he has to expose himself to these regressive experiences frequently to win his battle over them. Suicide is the ultimate defeat by the mother complex. When one kills himself, he consents to the great regressive force of the mother complex. She wins the battle and death prevails. The first task in approaching the mother complex is to understand that it is not one's actual mother, and it is not anyone out there who is making the trouble, for the real battle is always inward. Most dark moods in a man are his mother complex coming to the surface. Not to recognize this portion of one's feminine heritage is to be locked in bravado and the ceaseless battle of proving one's value. Masculinity out there is not difficult to achieve when one has fought the dragon battle. That terrible inner battle is totally feminine and is such a baffling struggle for a male. Just to define it is to begin one's freedom. Fighting with a feminine element is like fighting with a fog bank. Rough masculinity is completely ineffective. Consciousness and clarity are the effective tools. A particular touching example of the mother complex is found in the Grail myth, which again we'll talk about in part 2 of the podcast, that great Western repository of instruction on becoming a man. In Western mythology, the mother complex is represented by the dragon that every hero has to face and conquer. The fair maiden or princess, his inner anima, awaits him only after the dragon or mother complex has been conquered. So a man's journey, and then that's the end of the quote. So a man's journey to healthy, whole masculinity means he has to slay this dragon of the mother complex and how it shows up, and free the fair maiden, which is his anima, his soul. So basically, in order to free the anima and to have a body connection to his soul, he has to first fight this battle in the mother complex. And you see this actually because I've seen this in men in my life where, around teenage years, they can either grow up or they kind of stay in this adolescent maturity. And I have, people in my family who are playing video games like a lot, even well into their adulthood, and not learning how to have a mature relationship with a woman. I'm not saying video games is the only way. I'm just saying that's a very popular route. But you see this actually, men who just continue to kind of play with boy things, and at the same time, their relationship with women suffer. And it's not to say that video games are bad or whatever. It's just their engagement with it and how it's like a safety, security thing to regress, right?
Yeah, not only that, this is a typical example with video games, but even the first sentence, I think this quote is very profound. And what he says at the beginning, the bravado and bantam rooster behavior of any young male is a product of his fright at the impending dragon battle that faces him to battle his mother complex. I can see it in myself. I didn't get a conscious initiation ritual, right? Or healthy role model. So that's the masculine wound, what the vast majority of men are dealing with, and then it results in overcompensation, really, right? Of making a show. And that's why I see even this whole movement of we need to become more alpha male in this and what means to be a man. And when I look at somebody, again, not to psychoanalyze from afar, but somebody like Andrew Tate is somebody fully being taken over by his mother complex because he has to present himself as the ultimate alpha male and prove it and show it off.
Yeah.
That shows the deep insecurity of not having ever slayed the dragon within.
And I would argue the way that he speaks about women, which is often denigrating, is actually his experience of his own mother and projection towards his own anima.
The mother complex projected. He's trying to slay it externally by projecting it onto women.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When that's actually how he experiences mother complex. So should we talk about the anima next?
Yeah. So, this is now very important. We also go deeper into the Grail myth, actually in the second hour, because slaying the dragon of the mother complex in order to free the princess, which is in symbolism for the anima. Now, let's talk about the anima. We've briefly touched upon this in past podcasts, but let's go into depth here in context of masculine psychology. Now, the anima is the feminine component in every man's psychic structure, and it is the interior companion of inspirer of his life, right? It's, quote, she who animates and brings life and gives meaning to a man's life, as Carl Jung called it. And Carl Jung coined the term anima because it is her chief characteristic that she animates and gives life to man, the inspirer, right? She's a man's inner muse, poetic voice and guide. She carries a man's soul and is the mistress of his inner world. She's the inspirer, his source of creativity, the guide through the underworld, the essence of encouragement. And the word itself means actually strengthening of the heart. And most deepest of all, she's the carrier of meaning and purpose, right? It is she with her magic and her interior connection who bestows meaning and value in a man's life. So that is very key, and most often he projects this again externally and tries to find it outside himself instead of freeing the anima or the fair maiden within himself. And like we mentioned, the anima is symbolized by the fair maiden or the fair damsel, right? You see this we will talk about it, symbolized by Blanche Fleur in King Arthur and the Grail stories, or the Dulcinea in Don Quixote's tale, Beatrice in Dante's Commedia Divina, and so forth. And for anybody who doesn't know what a fair maiden or fair damsel is, it's an old-fashioned term referring to a beautiful young woman. And that's a symbol for the anima, for the inner feminine figure in a man. Generally speaking, integrating the anima within a man, or anima development, integration in a man, is about the man's evolution from carnal love and pure sexual desire also to opening up to emotionally and ultimate spiritual higher love and relationship.
And I think that's what a lot of women want in a man, right? They want a man to be more emotionally there for them, connected to them. They don't want him to be overtaken by the emotions, like this beta feminist kind of male archetype we have,
right,
but just connected enough that they can relate to her. But then interestingly, I can see, because the animus in women, which is the soul within women, which is masculine in nature, gets into a battle with this anima constantly. We won't go into that too much in this podcast, because to know that there's often a battle between these inner figures, between men and women, and how it really will show up is the woman will become hypercritical, or she'll, as the polarity people say, she'll become inner masculine, she'll become controlling and dominating, while the man will be very passive or disconnected from his emotions.
Well, the irony like attracts like. A man with an unintegrated anima or is possessed by his anima attracts a woman has an unintegrated animus, or possessed by her animus. And that's not being resolved by role play or behavior, but by an inner psychospiritual process.
Exactly. And I think that this is going to be the case in most relationships. You have to realize that there's going to be some degree of anima and animus possession and even battling going on whenever there's conflict in relationships. So just to know that it's normal, that if you're resonating with this, it's totally normal. And Carl Jung talked about how integrating the anima and animus was really the masterpiece of psychospiritual inner development. So it's a lifetime work, but it does add more meaning and value and connection to the relationship over time.
Yeah. So let's talk about this, how it shows up in the man when the anima is unintegrated. And there's two types of how it shows up when the anima, the inner feminine figure, is not integrated. One is being overtaken, possessed by the anima, seduced by the anima, as it's even talked about in the Grail myths, or the anima is completely rejected. Now, as you just mentioned, when the man is possessed by the anima, that's actually the beta male. Mm-hmm. And the rejection from the anima is actually in representation of the alpha male. Like, again, going back to the introduction, both beta male and alpha male are two sides of a coin of an unintegrated anima.
So the beta is possessed by the anima, he's overtaken by it, where the alpha is repressing his anima, his soul. Yeah. Exactly.
So when a man's anima, in general, his inner feminine aspect is not integrated, it does cause dysfunction in his outer life. Especially with anima possession being overtaken by her, the man becomes passive, indecisive, and is overly emotional, throwing tantrums like a child. He overreacts to minor slights and struggles with inappropriate responses in all of that, right? He's either freezes and can't act when needed, or impulsively takes action without proper consideration. So this is the quote-unquote beta male. And as we just mentioned, typically he's in a relationship with a dominant woman, with an animus-possessed woman who controls decisions and leads the relationship. And again, people have it backwards. It's not then people blame their partners, right? Or say women are this or that, or men are this and that, and trying to navigate via behavior control or action what, the man needs to become more leading or the woman needs to be more passive. But it's, again, the battle is within. Mm-hmm. This is the key point. Mm-hmm. And a man who gets possessed by his inner feminine figure, the anima, gets stuck in a cycle, right? Repeating the same mistakes, even dating similar women, facing the same struggles. And he's undecisive. He doubts his choices and also gets lost in overthinking. Ultimately, he also develops a fearful attitude towards risk, believing failure is inevitable, and then obviously which prevents him from acting more courageously and pursuing his goals. Ultimately, the anima's influence blocks the man's inner guidance by either making him overly cautious or emotionally reactive, preventing ultimately effective action in both small and significant situations. So these are all kinds of signs and ways a man can be overtaken by his anima.
Yeah.
Now, in contrast, there's the repressed anima, when a man completely shuts off his inner feminine quality, the inner muse, and completely dissociates from her. And that can result in an overriding intellect, stuck in the head, completely cut off from feelings and also creativity, cut off from the body, even though you may be highly identified with the body and wanting to have a fit body, but there's somatic intelligence missing. There's a barrier to deeper emotional intimacy, no access to intuition, diminished empathy and compassion, being very rigid, seeing emotions as a sign of weakness, being ruthless, and it usually compensates through as I mentioned before, hypermasculinity, like excessive competitiveness, aggression, needing to conquer women, and so forth.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote. Someone once said to me that a complex is when you either overdo it or underdo it. So the man who's being possessed by the anima, he's overtaken by it, and then the repressed anima is underdoing it. He has zero connection.
Yeah. So we go so deeper now into the anima story and how to integrate it and all this, also in the Grail myth in the second hour on King Arthur's legend. It's a beautiful story. But just to give some pointers about how to integrate the anima. Because ultimately integrating the anima, you don't want to reject her and you don't want to let her overcome you, right? It requires basically a balance between the intellect and the instinct and feeling nature, right? A rich inner feeling balanced by the intellect. So a man who has completely repressed the anima obviously needs to get more in touch with his feeling nature, right? Somatically into the body and really allowing himself to be more vulnerable. That's really what it comes down to. But what we see a lot is also the anima possession or being overwhelmed by emotions. So there are two types. There's the quick to react anima or the slow to react anima. And both are signs of unintegrated anima. The quick to react anima man needs to learn emotional regulations because he gets easily overwhelmed by feelings. He needs to learn how not to act in panic or when riled up, right? Not making decisions when being emotionally upset. He needs to basically wait and put off a response because the unintegrated anima creates a pressing urgency to, for example, send the email, confront the person, call somebody immediately. And this impulse needs to be resisted in order to change the anima in the unconscious. So what does it mean in practical terms? Delay the excitement, delay acting on it, so it loses its urgency, and so forth. With time and practice, the man will be able to enter then the situation consciously, right, without falling prey to the urgent emotion and acting impulsively. And once you're then able to hold the opposites in your consciousness, which ties into the practice of holding the tension of opposites, not to commit to any action, he will able to integrate his anima and make it serve him, right? Where she can inform him internally through healthy, intuitive, creative impulses, and then he can act out his masculinity externally. Informed by the anima within. Does that make sense?
Without being controlled by it. So
exactly.
It's like this uncomfortable feeling is making him act impulsively, which may not even be the best decision in the moment either, too.
Yes. And then there's the slow to react anima, because also anima possession can immobilize a man, right? And it shows up when the unintegrated anima implants doubt, right? And in this case, he needs to get also out of inertia and in inaction and using the will to become more decisive. It implies to develop a disciplined consciousness for solution and directions, right? To take charge. And the best attitude to take is basically to accept that, whatever decision you make, it may work or not work. But it's very important to act and make a decision and take an action anyway, and taking responsible for the decision, obviously. That's also part of healthy masculinity. It also implies making decisions without looking back or regret, but taking responsibility for whatever might come. And a sign of an unintegrated anima or anima possession is also when you make a decision as a man and then you freak out about it or you regret it and you question yourself continuously if it was the right decision.
Yeah.
It implies taking risk and embracing the unknown and basically taking action instead of just talking about it. So it's really the balance of not overreacting and also not being completely immobilized and no action.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that men can also be both too, right? Sometimes they're fast to react and slow to react. It's not just either or.
Absolutely. I definitely could see this in myself.
Yeah.
All right. So let's now look into the interrelationship between anima, the mood of a man, and the necessity for validation, what that really means, also in the context of in the relationship with the real life woman.
So every man hungers for validation of his masculinity, either consciously or unconsciously. And this validation is not necessarily related to anything in childhood or what his mother didn't give him. And in Robert Johnson's and the Jungian's terms, only a feminine figure, well, whether inner relationship to his anima or outer relationship to woman, will give this validation to who he is and what he does. And he says in his book, this is from Line from Heavenly Woman still.
Correct.
This quote, yeah. A man searches for this completion and validation in the realm of femininity, whether from an actual flesh and blood woman or from his own feminine nature. And a man is so vulnerable to the threat of losing this validation. A flip comment from his lady fair is all it takes to turn triumph into ashes for him. A woman comprehends so little this mechanism in a man and rarely knows what power she wields over him. And that's the end of the quote.
Yeah, so the important point in this context about validation is also understand that a man really lives at the mercy of his moods. And a mood can overcome a man when he's seduced by his anima. That's also from the Grail myth, when he's overtaken by feelings and he's just in a bad mood. And it's really difficult for a man to deal with the mood and these kind of emotions. Actually easier for a woman to deal with it because she's more in touch with her feminine nature, with the feeling nature. For a man, it's very hard. And once a mood comes over him, it can create havoc in his life. He then projects it on his partner, on the outside world. He becomes very moody, negatively, pessimistically oriented. And, the mood can also happen, when, as you in the quote just wrote, because a woman really doesn't understand much of a man's psychology, and she can also do a lot of harm in the way she communicates to him, right? And that pushes a man in his mood. Doesn't mean that the woman is responsible for it, but if he's already out of touch with his own anima figure, it just pours more salt into the wound, so to speak. So ultimately, when a man is disconnected or possessed by his anima, not integrated in a feminine part, he tends to get stuck in the bad mood of negativity and complain. So what he needs from his inner anima is the validation, the connection to his inner moods, right? The more his connection to his feminine inner part, that's an automatic validation for his own inner world. And that's what he really needs to establish. However, if a woman understands the dynamic in their own relationships, her animas or the man's anima, which can easily be overtaken or be projected on each other, a woman can support a man when he is in such mood, right? When he's struggling with his inner feminine elements. So it's basically the duty of femininity to blur the edges of masculine form and bring softness and relatedness, right, in the relationship. But also only, and that's the man's quote unquote task or job, only if it's contained and kept safe within sufficient masculine form and order.
What does that mean exactly?
It means that the man is also, when he's really more in touch with his anima quality, has it in check, he can become more man of masculinity, provide structure, order, and safety for the woman as well.
Yeah, so he has to be able to, so if he's not, because I can see too, sometimes when men are in a mood, the woman needs to also watch out. It doesn't turn into like a mother-child dynamic.
Exactly. That would be then if he projects his anima or mother complex onto the woman.
Yes, which very common too, by the way.
Very common, yeah. But so there's a fine balance because sometimes women completely shut off completely and sting more and become overcritical because their unintegrated animus comes.
So basically one of the shadows, and we'll have to do a whole episode on the animus eventually, but one of the shadows of the animus in women is actually becoming critical, domineering, controlling. So when a man gets into like a mood and is kind of in a state where he wants the woman to play his mother for him, just to take care of him, right? The woman could either take on that mother role and not feel good about it, obviously, because no one wants to be a mother to their partner, or she'll become critical and domineering and animus possessed.
Both are
it could be one.
It
would be one or the other, basically.
But Robert Johnson really explains it beautifully here. Do you mind reading this quote from him?
Yeah, a woman faces a delicate challenge when her man has fallen into a mood. If she brings forth her parallel to it and begins needling him, she sets off a highly negative exchange. Yet a point of genius is possible for her in this situation. If she can be more feminine than the man's mood and react out of her deepest femininity as contrasted with his misplaced femininity, this will give a man's vantage point of reality from which he can move out of his poor quality mood. It is a severe temptation for a woman to criticize, needle, or puncture, but her own natural femininity is never more creative than when it can be an anchor for a man caught in a whirlwind of his interior femininity. This requires a conscious and well-developed femininity in women, which is also, by the way, I might add, something that a lot of women, I notice, are working on. And then can continue the quote, it's a result of the many dragon battles she must fight to safeguard her own feminine kingdom. A woman must also understand that a man is much less in control or aware of things feminine than she is. Many women presume that a man should be as able as she is to control the ever-shifting play of light and dark, angel and witch in the feminine element. No man is capable of the same control as she has, and if a woman understands this, she can be patient and understanding as a man bungles along some light years behind her in his feminine understanding. The reverse is true in some other departments of life.
So that's very beautifully explained how a woman can support a man when he's in the mood possessed by his anima without falling into becoming the mother or taking on the projections. That requires obviously that the woman herself is in touch with femininity and has an integrated animus, her inner masculine counterpart.
Yeah, exactly. And for stuff on conscious femininity, check out Marianne Woodsman's work. One of my favorite audiobooks by her is called Sitting by the Well. Conscious femininity is a connection to a woman's own body, her feelings, her own soul, her own emotional intelligence. And, the thing that I think the polarity movement has right is that women have become masculinized. In Jungian terms, it would be animus possessed, and woman has become feminized. So a woman needs to also have access to her logos function, the animus, order, rationality, insight, creativity, but she's also still in the feminine nature, meaning connected to her body, feelings, and emotions.
Yeah. So, this is what women can give to a man battling his own inner dragon, so to speak, of the mother complex and anima. And here's also let's talk a little bit what a woman also needs from a man's integrated masculinity.
So a woman asks very different things of masculinity. She wants stability, protection, form, order, clarity, freedom are her needs from her man. But a man can only give this to her if he has a healthy and integrated relationship to his anima. And this is not coming from this brute alpha type masculinity.
So basically what that means, a lot of men, they talk a big deal, have big plans and these ideas and that, but they tend to be all over the place, don't have structure, don't follow through, right? It's not about just pushing through or forcing things. There needs to be a certain flow to it. And the structure, ironically, in order comes from the man integrated anima, his own inner feminine. So let's touch upon how the man can, or most men actually project their inner anima onto the women in their lives, right? And women in general, the wife, the partner, and so forth. They mistake the external woman as his muse, as a source of inspiration, as a goddess, and all of that, and can become very codependent or put the woman on a pedestal in a way that the woman would never be able to live up to this image. And that's why also a lot of relationships fail, because of the inability to live up to this projected positive goddess image onto the woman.
Yeah, so I think that can work as an overly positive projection where he expects the woman to be this goddess or the ideal woman, and he fails to see her as a human being. Or it can then very quickly turn to negative projection where he sees all of the moodiness and negative aspects of his anima in her, and then wants to tear her down or get angry at her, upset with her for living that out. So, and it's essentially just asking someone to live out the life of your own soul for you. And that can be very dangerous because your soul is obviously within you and it's not within another person.
And really, it's important to differentiate for a man these powerful forces within a man's life, right? To be really see his partner, wife as a human being without these overlay projections, and differentiate that from his own anima within himself, and also differentiate it from the mother complex.
Yes.
So that it takes time in the different stages in this development to become a truly embodied masculine, wholesome man, which we cover more in the second hour. But it's also interesting, by the way, that man can project their anima into inanimate objects, like cars or musical instruments or ships, where they literally give, I know many men who give, who are so obsessed with their cars, they give them female names, or female names to music instruments, or ships have always female names. It's the classical projection of a man's anima onto an inanimate object.
It reminds me, actually, Jeff Bezos, like in the past few years, bought this boat with this like big breasted woman right at the front of that actually looks like his literal new wife. And everyone was but it had actually this like very sexy woman at the front, which looks like his wife. So it's kind of happening in both forms.
That's hilarious. So again, just to summarize for the end of the first hour, the most important feminine inner parts for a man to slay and integrate, basically, are the mother complex, the dragon, to slay it, and to free the fair damsel, which is his anima, his inner muse, his creativity, his inspiration and meaning and purpose in life, without projecting either the mother complex or the anima on the external world. Because so many men are stuck in the contamination and constantly fighting the mother out there, the mother complex, right? They get upset at the waitress, the female office manager, the woman police officer, or the government and institutions can also be used as projections of the mother complex externally, right?
Mm-hmm. Or the left and the woke.
Exactly. No, it's absolutely the mother in 1,000 other disguises, right? Triggering basically the worth of a man who has not made the differentiation between the inner mother complex and the outer form. So this is a huge part, and so many men are like boys in adult man suits, are stuck in the phase of being overcome by the mother complex, stuck in the second phase of life. And in man psychology, there's 3 distinct stages of development of consciousness to integrate the masculine and the feminine within the man, which is the big topic of the Grail myth, Parsifal's journey and Parsifal's search for the Holy Grail in King Arthur's tale from the 12th century. And we'll dive deep into that then in the second hour. And again, if you're not a member yet, go to my website, veilofreality.com/membership, and you have access to all the second hours of over 145 podcast episodes. With that being said, we'll be right back.